Excellent. Well, thank you, Maria, for getting us started here. And I can see we have a few attendees starting to come in to today's One Burning Question session entitled, What About Clinical Sites? We will pause for a moment here and let a few other folks join in. I can see our virtual listening room is filling right up. So sit tight and we will get started in just a moment.
Sounds good, Scott. It's Michael, and I just wanted to send a shout out to Arti and Brad. Thanks so much for supporting us.
Excited to be here, guys. Thank you.
Same here.
And I'll just say I've missed you guys in our conversation, so I'm glad that we're back.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone. For those of you just still sort of entering the room, as it were, our One Burning Question podcast series has been a monthly session that we've been doing for the better part of a year or so. But when we got into the November, December timeframe, our schedule fell apart a little bit. So it's been a couple months, and we're excited to be back and be back better than ever, and kick off 2024 with I think a compelling, important topic for those of you who work in clinical research. So thanks again for joining. I see we're up to about 49 in our room, 50. We'll give it just another minute or two.
And I hope you all had a good holidays over that little break we took. I hate dead air. That's what it is. Sorry, Scott.
Hey, Christine. Big shout out to Edie and to Taya as well.
I know, the gang's back in town, right? And with a bang, Brad and Arti, two of my faves.
Yeah, I just shot a note to Scott a little bit earlier, but unfortunately, Sophie won't be able to join us this morning. She's having a little bit of a family emergency with her father, so she sends her best regards, and really sorry that she couldn't make it. She was looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, I hope everything turns out okay.
And if she's listening, she's in my thoughts and prayers. So
that's great.
Exactly. Thanks for mentioning, Michael. All right, I think we've hit a little bit of a plateau here of attendees of 50 or so, and as it's 9:04 or 11:04 or 12:04, depending on where exactly you're calling in from. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the January session of One Burning Question. We're really excited to have a couple fantastic guests join us today for the topic of what about clinical sites. I'll start off with introducing myself, walk through a couple quick housekeeping items, and then we'll get into the meaty topic of discussion. For those of you I've not had a chance to meet yet with, my name is Scott Schliebner. I am a clinical development executive, a commercial advisor, a board member, and a patient advocate, and a champion for all things related to patient-focused approaches. Been pleased to be part of our One Burning Question panel for the past year, and have the opportunity to interact with some my great co-moderators here as we tackle a question each month related to clinical trials and clinical development. So thanks again for joining us. In addition to sort of, what about clinical sites, including the site perspective in clinical development, why talk about this right now? Why is this an important question? Why is this burning as a question for January? And I'd like to kind of answer that rhetorical question real quick. Just the changing, ever-evolving landscape that is in front of us in clinical development. There's a lot of moving parts related to technology and decentralized clinical trials. There's a lot happening related to patients and patient recruitment. And for many of you, you're very well aware that a key stakeholder, a key cog within this clinical development machine, if you will, are the clinical sites, the clinical staff, our clinical investigators, who are really at the core of things. Now, ironically and unfortunately, these key stakeholders, our clinical sites, have often been forgotten about, let's say, or perhaps not fundamentally in the middle of a clinical trial planning scenario or perhaps not the first thing that we're thinking about at times. And as a result, I think our evolving clinical trial paradigm has sometimes forgotten about clinical sites, or assumed that they can implement technology, or assumed that they'll be fine with this latest protocol design. And so today's session is really focused on hearing a little bit more from our guest experts around that site perspective, what they're seeing in this changing landscape, and to share some insights that we may not necessarily see on a day-to-day basis. So we're really excited to jump into that. I'll be monitoring our audio discussion today, a couple sort of helpful LinkedIn audio hints for you. Feel free to use the invite button at the bottom of your screen to invite any friends or colleagues that you think might be interested in this event. They're welcome to join us at any point throughout today's session. We will also be recording this discussion, and we'll include a link in our summary post on LinkedIn, as well as in our Clinical Trials One Burning Question LinkedIn group. So that'll be available after the fact. Feel free to tap on any of the profiles of attendees, guests, moderators. You're welcome to follow me and any of our moderators and panelists today. We also do encourage audience participation in the second half of today's session. So sit tight, think about the questions you have or input or experience you want to share, and there will be an opportunity for you to raise your quote unquote digital hand in the second half, and we'll try to bring you to the stage to share your perspective. Lastly, you've got down here on the bottom, you have emoji buttons. Feel free to use that to respond and share your thoughts. And I just would like, again, one more time to just welcome everyone to LinkedIn Audio OBQ today. We've designed this monthly session for clinical trialists within the pharma and biotech industry, also for patients, patient advocates, and site staff that are interested in solving burning questions in clinical trials. And with that, let me pause for a moment and see if Maria, our host, if there's anything, Maria, that you need to chime in with at this stage.
Hello, guys. I would just ask everyone to kind of raise your hand when you are asking to speak with the panelists so that we can have an organized conversation. And I hope you enjoyed the information that our great team has prepared for you guys today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Maria. With that, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator panelists, the rest of the OBQ crew. We tend to rotate on a monthly basis of taking the lead with a new topic. So the great panel with me today does the same, and will be stepping up on stage in future months to kind of share their perspective. So with that, I can see we have, well, I'll just kind of bring this down into order of when folks are showing up on my screen. So Taya, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Scott. My name is Taya Romero. I am the Alliance Management Director for Scout Clinical, and I'm excited to be here. I'll pass it to Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine von Reisfeld, and I'm giving you the patient perspective. So who is on my list? I can't even. Edie, go for it.
Yay, thanks. I'm Edie Edens. I'm a senior research compliance consultant with First Class Solutions, and I tend to bring the compliance and ethics component to the conversation. Next up, I have you, Michael.
Michael, you're on mute.
Yeah, it would probably be helpful if I wasn't, but that's where most people enjoy having me. This is Michael Young, and I'm happy to be engaged with this group. We, as Scott pointed out, we started this actually over 2 years ago, and gravitated this over to LinkedIn Live here, or the LinkedIn audio. So looking forward to getting into the conversation here. I serve as a C-suite consultant in the life sciences arena with a heavy focus on clinical trial development. And I think, where are we going at this point? We come back to you, Scott, I believe.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Taya, Edie, Christine, and Michael for chiming in. Look forward to kind of hearing your input and questions a little bit later on. For those of you who are just joining us, we're kicking off, and I'd like to first talk about real quick Consuli, our sponsor today, and then introduce our guest speakers. So thank you to our host and our show producer, Consuli. For those of you who don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company, a B Corp with a mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts suggest our individual health data is worth $20,000 per year. Consuli helps people choose who gets access to and how their personal information is used, and if and when desired, get them paid for their data and can make medicine better. Consuli does this by operating a marketplace for members where Consuli becomes their agent. Members receive smart matched individualized offers from Consuli for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There's no cost to join the movement. You can learn more at consuli.net. And they are sponsors, and I'd like to thank them again for their support in getting us to this point. Again, today we're here to talk about clinical sites and the clinical site perspective, and to hear what's happening behind those closed doors. I'd like to first introduce our two guest speakers who will be leading our discussion today. I'll try to keep this brief so that we can jump right into the discussion itself that you're all patiently waiting for here. First, I'd like to welcome Arti B, who is the co-founder and CEO at Civ Health. Arti's a distinguished clinical research leader and clinician who's dedicated her career to pioneering innovative solutions for efficient clinical trial management and enhancing patient care. She has a passion for advancing clinical research, a passion for patients, demonstrated a commitment to optimizing clinical trial operations. Currently serving as the co-founder of Civ Health, Arti continues to drive transformative change by showcasing a dedication to staying on the cutting edge of industry advancements. We're really thankful to have you with us, Arti, and looking forward to hearing your perspective shortly. And secondly, the man who needs no further introduction, Mr. Brad Hightower, along with his fantastic facial hair. Brad is the CEO of Hightower Research. For many of you out there, you might see Brad's insightful and sometimes humorous perspectives on LinkedIn. He's an excellent vocal advocate for clinical sites, and I think is a perfect person to join us to share perspectives on what is happening at the clinical site and how we can improve things for the site perspective. So thank you, Mr. Hightower. Happy to have you with us today.
Thanks, man. I'm excited.
All right. And with that, we'll jump right into a couple of the topics we'd like to discuss. So the goal is to have a conversation today and to stimulate some ideas and conversation. These discussions sometimes turn provocative, and hopefully they end up productive. So clinical sites, you might be saying, what's so relevant about this topic? Isn't this a stable part of the clinical development life cycle and landscape that never changes? What's new in this area? Well, from my vantage point, and I think from some others, we're seeing a rapidly changing landscape related to clinical sites. We see individual community-based sites that are joining larger site networks and becoming part of a formalized group. We're seeing a lot of activity around private equity and venture capital firms acquiring and purchasing site networks. We've also seen a couple large global CROs build their own site networks, which brings up some interesting questions around CROs and sites all being under the same roof. So this changing landscape of site networks becoming more of a thing, and the attention being paid on that, what does this all mean? What kind of impact does this have on us, on sites themselves, and on patients? So I'd like to turn it over to you, Arti, first, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your perspective on what do you think this means for us?
Thanks, Scott, and wonderful to be here with everybody. So, this whole idea of consolidation of sites and everything, we have been here before. And what I mean by that is, look at the example of healthcare industry. Healthcare industry and clinical research industries, they go hand in hand, and it's for me, I draw the parallels between independent physician clinics or all of those getting consolidated uh, into physician networks, private equity backed, and consolidations into bigger hospital systems. So we have been here before, and so my belief is we are going to see the same trends that we have seen in that example, and so which kind of gives us a bit of an advantage if we are willing to use that, is to kind of anticipate what we can see from this movement. Unfortunately, either if we like it or not, whatever, fortunately or unfortunately, it is here. It's going to happen. The train has left the station, so it's going to go. Our job is to make the best of it and learn the lessons from the previous example. So that's my take on it for now.
Okay. Sure. So in a sense, you're, history repeating itself. You're saying we've seen some of this before in some other industries, and you can anticipate maybe repeating itself in a sense, right? With similar outcomes. What do you feel like you've seen before, and what does your crystal ball tell you is going to be sort of the outcome of this consolidation?
Right. So I mean, what I anticipate is, I mean, of course, there is pros and cons to every side, right? And almost everything in the world has that, right? So I mean, and both are equally valid, and there always will be two sides. So, but I mean, it's we shouldn't keep the mentality of one side over the other. Like there are no winners here. We need to work on collaborating and growing together. So what I see is going to happen is it is going to bring the benefits of scaling and access to resources and enhanced capabilities. Technology is going to be a big part of this. But we have to kind of, because we are experiencing the changes that has happened in healthcare as users or resources or even professionals within the industry. There are instances of loss of autonomy or cultural misalignments, operational challenges, staff discontent and burnouts. Physician burnout is a big deal. So we have to anticipate all of these and kind of address them beforehand or as we go along, and acknowledge them and not steamroll or sideline these concerns. So that's how it will make the fit or the change much more better.
Got it. Kind of adjusting to sort of the change that's coming and the pros and cons. Yes, agree. There's pros and cons. Brad, I'm curious on your perspective as somebody who, residing there in the great state of Oklahoma, which for those of you out there who don't know, the Oklahoma state motto is labor conquers all things. So Brad, do we just need to work harder to deal with these changes, or how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'll say, I'll preface this by saying, I'm not necessarily an expert when it comes to M&A and private equity, but I'm really fascinated by what's going on, like in the site landscape right now. In my experience, limited though it may be, and if you take even a cursory Google search, I mean, private equity's involvement in healthcare has pretty much only resulted in worse patient outcomes and higher costs. And you can find that, detailed in a lot of different studies out there. So you can color me, cynical or skeptical, which is probably a big shock to anyone listening, that private equity is going to be able to really improve the state of clinical trial operations at sites. Now, as Arti sort of, referred to, maybe there's some economy of scale they can reach, or other sorts of centralization that they can bring that do help sites. And frankly, sites do need that. I do agree that we need to see some. I struggle to use the word standardization, but sites are often, as much as I again hate to admit it, are often the bottlenecks in a lot of ways in getting these clinical trials done. So while I wouldn't mind seeing some consistency brought and maybe some standardization, I don't know that private equity is the place for it to happen. My understanding about private equity is they make their money by selling things, not by running businesses. So I don't know that they have a vested interest in making sites better over the long term. Again, I can consider me, skeptical when it comes to that.
Yep, fair enough. So if we were for a moment, if we stepped back and we shelved our cynical perspectives for a moment and said, okay, private equity firms maybe are interested in removing inefficiencies and making the clinical trial process more productive and building out some better value there. And there was a pure interest in just improving things, delivering medicines to patients and increasing access to medicines. You guys have both mentioned, Arti and Brad, you've both mentioned a little bit pros and cons. There could be some efficiencies. What are a couple tangible things, Arti, that you see? Maybe you can give us a couple, and Brad, you can also share a couple of what do you see as positives that come out of this, right? If there is a network with scale, with maybe the ability to screen patients and facilitate enrollment across multiple sites or reduce administrative costs, what are a couple things you see as positives that can come out of this?
Right. So, I mean, of course, there are positives coming out of this because, like Brad mentioned, that yes, this is going to help scale a lot of things, and scaling with it brings a lot of, benefits of being able to make operations more efficient, which in ripple effect, at least technically, they provide better care options. The quality of care changes, and there are just because the bottlenecks that happen due to administrative burden and all of that, it just helps with reducing or taking out those bottlenecks because of the resources. I mean, the massive resources that it brings, these consolidations, or because they're private equity backed, or CROs, they have the financial and the operational muscle power to kind of address all of these. So those are the benefits that they do bring
Okay.
with them. But of course, it all depends on the intent, because the power is there. It is up to us as an industry of how we use it. So that's where it all hinges, and that's where we need to find the balance.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some good stuff there. All right, Brad, with great power comes great responsibility. What are some positives here you think we'll see?
Yeah, I mean, to echo that, I think, if, again, to speak a little bit broadly, but, I talk to a lot of sites, a lot of small independent sites. And for the record, independent sites still outnumber site networks, the last statistics I've seen on it. But generally, in my experience, people starting sites are people not unlike myself. They're people who want to be there serving their communities. They want to have a role in getting the right drugs to the right people. Now, many of us may be great operators when it comes to making those things happen, but we don't have the resources. Again, go look at SCRS's recent site landscape survey or whatever it is. I mean, sites don't have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of resources. So, being able to partner or have private equity backing you and could obviously expand the resources you have available as a site. Could also take some of that burden off of the operator so they can operate and not worry about I still run payroll every 2 weeks. I still do all those things that frankly, if I didn't have to do it, I'd love not to. I'd love to be able to focus on the things that I'm really good at and helping serve our community. I don't know that the problem's not what, the problem is why, I think. And maybe already kind of hinted at that, right? Like for us, and for me, at least, especially, I feel like, I'm doing this because of a why, not because of a what. And that's where I start to lose a little bit of faith in, private equity's long game when it comes to their involvement in sites.
Yeah, fair enough. For those of you listening in our audience, we will be opening this up in the second half for your comments. So if you have some pros and cons out there that haven't been mentioned, jot them down, and we'll make sure to pull you up to the stage when we get to that point. I can see some attendees from CROs. I can see some site staff. I see sponsors. I see various service providers. I see one of my neighbors here in attendance. So we've got a nice broad perspective, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So let's say this train has left the station, as you've said. Let's say that this is cyclical in a way, and that we've seen this occur in other areas. We're not going to prevent this from happening, but maybe we can optimize it in a way. The other angle we have, in addition to VC and PE firms rolling up sites and trying to build some value and reduce efficiencies, is we have a couple different clinical research organizations that have either formed formal alliances with site networks or that have purchased and acquired site networks. So, for example, our two largest CROs out there in the world, IQVIA has their AvaCare network, and the second largest CRO in the world, Icon, has their AccelaCare network. It brings up the really interesting question here of, for those of you who work in this space and you know it really well, clinical research organizations are often involved on behalf of sponsors to conduct clinical studies, to monitor them, to ensure integrity of data. And clinical monitors and medical monitoring and data review is all sort of independent of patients and clinical sites. Now we're starting to move to a world of, again, creating efficiencies, eliminating maybe overhead or costs. Putting sites under the CRO umbrella raises some questions around potential perceived conflicts of interests. If your biotech company outsources a study to IQVIA, and they're also going to enroll sites as part of IQVIA's AvaCare network, and IQVIA monitors are also traveling to those sites, it raises the question, how do you operationalize this in a way where there's appropriate firewalls there? And so I'd love to hear your guys' input on this. Brad, maybe you can get us started. I don't know if you've directly interacted with these groups yet, where they're both monitoring their own sites that they own, but it raises some interesting questions here, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. When I see this stuff, I'm like, am I crazy? Something seems really not right. This doesn't kind of sort of pass the sniff test, like, right? And you know, I've had a little bit of experience on kind of both sides. I mean, I think people publicly are like, oh no, there's firewalls and nothing to worry about, and surely there would never be a in situation where anything unethical would possibly ever happen, which of course nothing ever has, right? But then I've had plenty of back channel conversations with people that are like, the sponsors don't love the risk either. Like, this is something that there's concern about. It doesn't function as well behind the scenes as, maybe it's being made out to be. That's not clear to me. And I'd love to hear from people in the audience, but it's pretty obvious to see, yeah, if you're winning sponsor business and you're placing it at your own sites and you're negotiating your own budgets and you're monitoring your own work, that should raise red flags for people, right? I mean, I don't feel like that's a conspiratorial angle to take.
I think we should always be asking those questions, right? Is this appropriate? How are we managing this right? There's been a few things out in the news over the last couple of months that several of us here have commented on, right? Patients enrolled in a site, were those patients real? Were they duplicate patients? Sponsors going in and removing, a dozen sites and several hundred patients from a trial because they kind of question the integrity there. When sites are incentivized to enroll and put patients on study, and the CRO managing that owns those sites, it raises some questions, Arti. So what's your take on this? Is this fine and we have nothing to worry about, or does this raise some red flags we need somebody to look into further?
So, I mean, there is never anything that, like you said, we should always ask questions, but that doesn't mean we should be paranoid. So I always like to take a balanced approach. So yes, this is a conflict of interest as a person who believes in the regulatory framework. Yes, this is a conflict of interest, but that doesn't mean you stop. So yes, these things should raise questions, and those are valid questions. And just answering vaguely like there are firewalls in place and all of that, it's not gonna cut it. Like, that is not gonna be enough, because much bigger things are at stake here. And so that's why there needs to be a backing of a robust regulatory framework for this. And more importantly, there should be transparency on this. And that's when you will, because you cannot steamroll or sideline these concerns, saying that these might be conspiracy theories or people are thinking too much and there are obvious benefits to this, why people don't understand this. No, they, because the flip side has some valid, reasoning, and it is based in some logic. So we have to understand and address to that logic, and show, like, you know why we are doing this, and how we are mitigating these risks. And I think, yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to more feedback from sponsors or even regulators on this case, because I mean, CROs and private equity, I mean, they are doing their job. Put yourself in their shoes. They are trying to do this operationally, like making operational efficiencies and earning money from it. That's their job. That's fine, nothing wrong with it. But if they are to do things right, they need guidance from sponsors and regulators. And so sponsors and regulators need to provide that feedback, that how they should be doing these things right, to fit into, like, so when these products or these drugs get approved, that they are not biased, or they are not,
Right.
like
Yeah.
all of that. So that's what I'm looking forward to, is that feedback. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's great. These two topics we've brought up, VC and PE firms buying sites and buying site networks and rolling them up to build efficiencies. It's very analogous, right, to what's going on the CRO side, where they're, if we're monitoring studies, if we're building site budgets, if we're paying sites, hopefully they're paying them on time. Why not combine those things together and make that more efficient, right? But we've seen this in other industries when that goes unchecked. There's some concerns. Our resident compliance expert, Edie Edens, is probably convulsing and sweating over there right now, ready to jump in. We're going to get to you, Edie. I also know we have some CRO and sponsor staff attending that I'm sure you have input. If we do not get to all of your input today, I would really welcome you to reach out to me. I think that this topic is one that we're going to have to dig into further today, but also beyond today. I think there's a lot here to sort out, and I want to make sure we're hearing the variety of different perspectives. So I'd like to talk about one more topic briefly with Arti and Brad, and then I'd like to turn it over to some of our co-moderators who probably have questions, because on the OBQ we try to get provocative and we try to dig into something that's important. So if we're not getting you worked up, then we're not doing our job. So the last piece I want to just touch on here is technology and ways that technology is being used to support sites, and maybe ways that technology is unintentionally overly burdening sites, right? So we've, last year was the year of the decentralized clinical trial. We're doing a lot to increase access to patients, make trials less burdensome for patients, ensure our trials are more representative and that people can participate from the comfort of their own home. And I've personally seen that in doing so, we've unintentionally burdened the clinical sites. For those of you out there, if you have not seen Brad Hightower's YouTube video where he describes this process and physically stacks up the technology in front of him to where it eclipses his head, I would encourage you to Google that and take a peek at that, because that's another nice perspective on sites just sort of being on the receiving end of things. So, Brad, I know this topic is near and dear to your heart, and it's hard to sort of summarize maybe within a minute here, but can you give us kind of what you're seeing lately? Is there a pendulum swinging back to the middle where people are pulling back, or is it still a fire hose of new technology kind of coming your way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still a lot new. I will say this, and I don't ever want to give people the impression that I'm not against I'm not against using technology. I'm against using shitty technology, and unfortunately, we have a lot of it at the site level. But I will say this: I think encouragingly, we're seeing, over the last month, I've had 2 different tech vendors come out and just spend a day on site, and they are starting to hear, I think, sites' very legitimate concerns and just want to come out. They want to talk to coordinators. They want to actually see how this stuff is being, received, stored, implemented at their sites, at the sites that they're, working with, which I take, hugely encouraging. And, let's be honest, like the way, decentralized trials or not, the way to patients is still through sites overwhelmingly, right? So it benefits everybody to really partner and make good friends with the sites. We want good stuff too. So just come talk to us, man. Let's figure it out together. And I think that's increasing, and that's been incredibly encouraging to me.
How about you, Arti? I know you're a technologist at heart and have built some great tools to make things easier for sites. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so I mean, yes, I'm using technology as a tool. I mean, Scott, I'm a clinician at heart. I mean, my patient stories are what drives me. But yes, I mean, my take on this is there's a foundational theme to this, right? I mean, reducing administrative burden and increasing efficiencies. But again, that has been theme of all industries from their dawn, right? We are using technology right now as a tool of choice because that's the stage we are at as on the world level, basically. And so, but we also have to recognize that technology is in its toddler stages. Maybe it's moved from infancy, but it is still in toddler stages, and it's going to take much more maturing to need, before it kind of, addresses or provides the benefits that we all are anticipating. And what has happened is this, because of that, it does add a lot on site split. Sites struggle with like various platforms, and there are its difficulties with seamless communication between the system. It adds a layer of responsibility for the sites. You have to do all kinds of trainings and skill gap, for the skill gaps and all of that, increase data management workload. And there are a lot of, it adds to the, it strains the budgets. And so there, it brings all of these things with it. But what has happened is we feel this pressure because we are not used to this methodology. This happens in tech world all the time, like the agile methodology of application, where you kind of learn, and like how Brad mentioned, the tech groups were there and they are now learning and everything. We are used to the other way, the traditional way, where you learn all of this and then you build something. But that's not how tech world works. They build, they roll it out, and it's work in progress. So that's what it is. And I guess we have to just then make the best of it and provide our honest feedback, so that, because it's here, I mean, technology is in our human world, whether we like it or not. It is the next revolution. We are living it. We are making history. So we just have to, provide our feedback, do our part, and try to make it work for us.
Great. Well, thanks for providing your feedback. I'd love to turn this over to any questions or comments that my co-moderators have. At this point, our run of show agenda is completely out the window because we've got sort of an engaging topic here. But Edie, maybe I can put you on the spot a little bit here, because I imagine you've got some thoughts here related to CRO site ownership or sites rolling up. Would you like to jump in here at all?
Always. I mean, I'm a very outspoken advocate of the relationships that require improvement in this space, and very much echo the sentiment of what Brad already said, which is there's an opportunity for collaboration across the many silos in this ecosystem, but it does require breaking down barriers and having conversations. And I think in any industry, when you see an oversight, whether intentional or negligent, of the end user, whether that be the patient or the site before the patient, right? In the life cycle here, that's a mistake, right? No matter what industry you're in, because you have to have that input to appropriately, strategically set from the top to the bottom that workflow in the most meaningful way, and to get the most meaningful data. So I don't have a ton to say from a compliance perspective, other than I would say at this point, from what I'm seeing in the regulatory space, this is being encouraged. Large regulatory bodies like For example, the FDA, which, I cannot speak for and I'm not trying to, but at least from the conversations that are being had, the webinars that are being hosted, I mean, they're very much not only behind the idea of more fully involving clinical sites, but the knowledge and insights that it could bring to streamline the industry could be invaluable, because we're seeing so many different solutions, vendors, tech, et cetera, crowd the market and solve problems that I'm not sure exist, or I'm not sure that that's what the sites needed most, if you will. And so your regulatory really want to see this streamlined. We also want to see that applied to us too. It should be applied to every silo in the ecosystem. We all should be more expeditious, and we all should not be living, under a rock, so that we can better understand how to interact with one another. So I don't think there's a lot of regulatory burden or, hurdles here in the sense of anyone's going to stop this from happening. I think if anything, we're going to see more promotion of it, and we're going to see better regulatory and compliance from it.
Excellent. Thank you, Edie. Thank you for your perspective as always. Just
Can
going
I
around.
hop in, Scott?
Oh, please. Yeah, go right ahead, Christine.
Well, first I want to say, Arti, I agree with everything that you've said. And I think we have to look at this as all of this technology is a tool. And I see a lot of people in the tech space who think this is the end all be all answer, and it's not. And so from my patient perspective, I want these things to work, right? I want to get better, and I want to give my data to the right people. But then I also see lawsuits with the FTC around my data. I see people using it in ways that they shouldn't be, and with no real benefit back to me as a patient. And so for me as a patient, I really just think we've got to get it together, right? As a patient, you don't have access to your data. This information isn't helping us. And I think we're going to get to a point that patients are going to stop participating in research. Right now, we don't even differentiate the difference between research for research purposes or research for commercialization. You've got patients who don't get access to drugs, even if they help build the drug themselves. And so I don't know where we're going with all of this, but I think we have to look at what the benefit is and where this is going. And I really think we need to start showing some sort of benefit back to the patients who are participating. And really, I don't want to do any of this, right? I want to give my data to someone and have them give me opportunities and put me in these things. And I'm happy to do this. But I think we have a lot of talks around incentives, and there's no incentive yet that I see for those patient communities. So how do you really involve patient communities with these sites in a way that we can do this properly and ethically? And I don't know, just figure it out.
Yeah, great points, Christine. Thank you so much for chiming in. Michael, you have anything you'd like to share at this stage?
Scott, I'll tell you what, I'm really busy trying to send out links to everybody that's listening here. So I'm going to hold my comments to the end here, just simply because I think we want to get some of the audience in here as quickly as we can.
Absolutely. No problem. That sounds great.
Thanks.
Scott, I would like to add something really quickly. I want to kind of piggyback off of what Christine had mentioned about involving those patient communities, and how do we increase, the diversity that we need now with this new FDA diversity plan requirement. How are the sites tackling that, Brad and Arti? And do you feel a lot of pressure on the sites to make sure that those diversity numbers are being realized?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think it's still something that we're sort of grappling with, as a site sort of community, if you will. I do think, and to kind of go back to the even idea of, private equity or CRO ownership, whatever the case may be, that could be a place where you do see some advantage because, there's a lot of site models. I work in a site model in which we go partner with community physicians. I don't think that's done enough. I think that could go a really long way towards increasing diversity because, again, you take the trials to the communities that, are underrepresented. But if you're a small independent site, you may not have the resources to just up and do that. That's challenging. However, if you've got a CRO who's got great data to know, like, okay, we know there's patients in these communities. Can we partner with a site to go prop up, a research site, start making relationships in the community? Obviously, you can't just walk in and start doing research, but I think you can, start to partner in a way to where you can develop those relationships together. And I would love to see that. Now, I don't know that that means a CRO needs to outright buy sites, but I do think there's a place where being a little closer to the sites could have a huge advantage in moving the needle. And I don't think we've done that yet. I mean, in full transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and my take on this is, I mean, yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, it's one of the topics that's another of my drivers and close to my heart. But so yeah, I mean, this consolidations. I mean, like I said, it's gonna bring a lot of power. So it's up to us the option how to use it, because it will definitely have the muscle power to address the DEI issues as well, because it's not easy to address those issues, because there are a lot of hurdles, but we can use this muscle power to address it, but it has to be driven as an organizational initiative and by the leadership, because otherwise it will further overshadow these locations. And so consolidations, to me at least, they should not mean that bringing back the hubs of where the care is provided. No, it should still mean, for me, consolidations mean bringing the power to the hub and spoke and empowering the spokes as well, and so that we do maintain the initiative of reaching all these diverse populations and actually making it easier to bring the trials to them and not other way round. So that's what I'm hoping for.
The collaboration and consolidation, right? There could be an ability there to work together to connect to the clinical sites. I think where that goes too far on the other end of the spectrum, of course, is taking collaboration and consolidation to a point where you have maybe some conflicts of interest in some scenarios where you don't have the appropriate checks and balances. And I'm not saying I know what those are appropriately, but there does seem to be the optics out there that there could be we're going in a direction where we're going to have to sort of, I think, have somebody sort of check in and put some guardrails around this. So really, interesting dynamic that I think 2024, we will see a lot more of this in terms of the consolidation, and look forward to hearing where this is going. So with about, just keeping an eye on the clock on the housekeeping front, we've got about 10 more minutes left, and we have yet to really open this up to the audience. I would love to hear some perspectives or questions that we have. We're probably going to have everyone be rather brief in their points, but Taya, is there anyone that, I don't know if we're seeing hands being raised or anything that we want to let people have a chance to step in? We've got...
I see a hand, but I can't bring them
Yeah.
up. Isabel's in the audience.
Let's see if
I can allow Isabel to speak. Give me a minute.
Great. Thanks, Maria.
You're welcome. There you go, Isabel. You should be able to speak now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Please.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to it's provided for me to make my 2 cents comments. So there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, right? And in order for it to be a perfection, which is not going to happen like overnight, we have to make sure that that puzzle piece fits. So I can talk about just about every topic that everybody mentioned and put my 2 cents in it, but because lack of time, I just want to make myself brief. As a monitor, I'm a field monitor. I've been in the industry for over 20 years. And sometimes I often wonder how some sites get selected versus others in regards to what my purpose is, making sure patient safety is involved and data integrity, right? And so having said that, there's so many. I wanted to touch on something that Arti said about burnout, physician burnout and staff burnout. So when I go to a site, sometimes I wonder, how do these sites get selected? Because oftentimes they don't have enough staff. Oftentimes they have a big overturn. And so every time you have to go back and you have to, reintroduce the protocol or reintroduce the training, which is a PI responsibility, but from a CRA perspective, I have to make sure that everybody's qualified to conduct the trial. And oftentimes sites kind of overburn themselves too because they take too much upon themselves. Research pays good money if you're, starting up as a clinical site. So oftentimes sites have 3 or 4, 8, 9, sometimes even 8 studies with 1 or 2 staff, taking care of all the studies. Every protocol has his criteria in regards to what it needs, what kind of population it needs. I believe in inclusion as well. I would like to see a lot more diversity in clinical trials. There's just so many pieces, so many pieces to the puzzle that it's a matter of trying to get one perspective, kind of like one alliance in a way, one type of vendor, not one, but basically a vendor that's going to work for everybody. It's overwhelming for a lot of the staff having to do different vendors, different data management, different, let's say IRT systems. And then you have minimal staff or it's a big, turnover. So I think that is where we need to start in regards to how sites are being selected. So yeah, oftentimes when I go on site and I monitor, it's just so many things that you have to do to ensure that the quality data is there, to ensure that the staff has a proper requirements to participate in the trial. And so in order for us to be more effective, I think conversations need to continue to take place to find ways to, maybe eliminate overburn, selecting the proper sites. And from my perspective as a CRA, I don't have that option as far as site selection. Sponsors a lot of times have their favorite sites. And even if the site let's say the site is a high enroller, for example, it doesn't matter if you could be a high enroller, but if your data is not good, it just defeats the purpose of having quality data for that particular trial, right?
Yeah.
So oftentimes it just depends on how the sites are being selected and how, how can I say it? How the sites are being selected and the quality of staff or the staff that they have.
Yeah, great points, Isabel. I think staff resourcing is a huge issue, of course. Site selection is interesting, to say the least, right? Feasibility studies, quote unquote. We result in a lot of sites that never enroll a patient on a clinical trial. There's some built-in inefficiencies there. So agree with your points. Thank you for sharing your perspective. We're going to move onward to
Thank you.
you're welcome. It looks like Justin's joined us. Justin, do you want to unmute yourself and share your perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, everyone. I'll be very brief. I probably wouldn't have raised my hand unless Scott had brought up this point, but the prevention of duplicate research participants in clinical trials is a very hot topic. Currently, the only way to confirm whether or not a participant is eligible for a study based upon their current and past research history is literally asking the research participant. It's a very outdated model. And so I know that there's always such a strong emphasis on speed of recruitment, which is valid. We need to do more and work faster, but many times there's a lack of quality and implementing a process and a solution to prevent duplicate participants should be a gold standard, leveraging technology moving forward. And so happy to explore with anybody out there new ways and processes. Verified Clinical Trials does this. Should be a top-down approach. Shouldn't be the burden shouldn't be put on the site to try to do this because they can't do it. They don't have the tools to do it. So sponsors and CROs should be implementing a tool to support this process of prevention of duplicate participants. And Edie is a advocate of this, and we've been chatting lately. But just wanted to say that there are tools out there to prevent this from happening moving forward. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks for chiming in. Yeah, could we bring up? Oh, great. We've got Subramaniam. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Would you like to unmute and share your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually stumbled upon to this through LinkedIn. And I thought it was very interesting and wanted to join. Definitely very interesting, but I come from a preclinical perspective. I've done a lot of preclinical studies going into IND programs and from there. And my wife did CRA at PPD a long time ago. And my question relates to that because I keep hearing that 90% of the clinical trials fail. Now you brought in another interesting perspective that the clinical sites probably have to be blamed to some extent because they're not ready to do these clinical trials yet, and maybe that may be one of the reasons why clinical trials fail, or it is the technology. See, coming from a preclinical perspective, I have a lot of data that says that animal trials don't translate to the clinical trials. And this is where I'm putting my efforts to build the human models, 3D models, and everything to translate better to the clinical outcomes. So there's a lot of things that don't connect with each other, the clinical trials or the preclinical trials, and even the clinical trials doing these clinical sites doing these trials, uh, etc., etc. So, what are you guys' thoughts about it? I'm just trying to put everything into a perspective here,
Sure.
because the
Sure.
preclinical is very essential for clinical.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if I can jump in, Scott. I mean, it's complicated, right? I think as some of the other people have mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts here, and there's a lot of nuance. And I think, if anything, a theme that I think has been emerging for a while is just the siloing of all these different parties and stakeholders, where everybody's kind of doing their own thing without much regard for anyone else. So nobody gets a clear picture of what the heck's going on. Obviously, yeah, sites can certainly hold some, I guess, blame, if you can use the word, in terms of getting, help getting trials across the finish line. But I would urge you to go visit a site, go look at some of these protocols that we're seeing, and realize how they stand in complete contrast to standard of care, to the extent that they become almost impossible to enroll as a site. So again, that's one variable, but there are hundreds. So it's challenging. I sympathize for sponsors and CROs as much as I sympathize with sites, because one thing that's not aligned can essentially ruin the trial, so to speak. But we could probably go on for hours about this stuff, but I think ultimately, yes, it's extremely complicated.
Yeah, Brad, your point's great, right? There's a lot of different. Not only there are a lot of stakeholders, but we have to be careful too when we talk about less than 10% of clinical trials being successful. Or there's a comment on our invitation here. I was just responding to 7.9% of trials are successful. Well, so there's an element here of, right, there's clinical trials are measuring the efficacy and safety of a drug or device or a biologic or an intervention. So some drugs work really well, some don't. It's not Brad's, it's not Hightower's fault if the treatment was not as effective as we thought it was, right? Certainly there's operational and compliance pieces here, but if you back that up, you mentioned the preclinical data. The funnel that we work with from drug discovery to finding a viable preclinical target to actually moving in the clinic to something actually being successful and being marketed is, it's minuscule. It's one out of thousands, right? So most fail because they don't work. And there are moving parts here where sites play a role in enrolling patients, but there's a lot of other factors there, right, that have nothing to do with the sites or even the patients. It has to do with maybe the therapeutic and is it actually working. So great perspectives. I really appreciate everyone stepping up. Edwin, I know you've been waiting there for a moment. I think we're going to try to make you our last comment as we've gone a little bit over. Would you like to unmute yourself and share your thoughts?
Thank you, Scott. I'll keep it very brief. My question or comment is more about the conflict when CROs start owning these sites. Brad did mention, and I know there was some kind of a solutions of saying there will be a regulatory framework and there will be some transparencies, but at the end of the day, even if there is a perception of a conflict, That's a big question mark. So does the panel or anybody in the audience have more concrete ways to address that conflict when CROs start owning these sites?
I mean, I agree with that. I think there will always be a perception, even if there are regulations in place. So I don't know, like, you can solve that in my mind anyway. Although, again, maybe that's a little strong, but that's just my personal take.
Can I throw out a weird thought or suggestion? I think, why don't we give patients back their data and let me choose an agent, and then we choose a site, and then you work with me as a patient with my physician, you get clinical data, and it works out easier, right? You don't have duplicate patients because I'm choosing one agent who has my data and is able to shop that around in whatever there may be. So I think we're looking at this always from the wrong perspective, and maybe if we adjust our thinking, we can make it work.
Yeah, maybe a little bottom up there, Christina. Maybe from the patient perspective upward can meet sort of this top down sponsor CRO site networks working downward to patients. Maybe there's meeting in the middle there. Thanks, Edwin. Yeah, wish we had another hour to dig into that deeply and talk more about that. I know we've got some other folks who've raised their hands. We're a little after the hour, a little after 10 o'clock on the West Coast, 1 o'clock on the East Coast. So we've got to wrap up. I'm pleased that we've generated some thoughts and that we've brought up some controversial topics and tried to engage everyone. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you also for sharing your perspectives. Thank my co-moderators. I'd also like to really thank Brad Hightower and Arti for joining us as our guest speakers today and taking time to be with us. Our sponsor, Consuli, has helped us make this possible today. I'd like to thank them for their support. We obviously have an OBQ LinkedIn group that you can stay connected to. You can also share your comments or further questions via that group, and we can respond and get back to you. And if you've enjoyed this and you'd like to join our next monthly OBQ session, next one will be February 16th from 9 to 10 o'clock Pacific time.
And that's my month.
Christine will be leading our discussion with that, so you are assured to be promised an excellent and stimulating topic. And again, I'd like to thank my co-moderators and thank everyone in the audience for joining in and sharing your thoughts. Let's keep this discussion going.
Thanks, Scott. Great job.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your Friday.
Thank
Happy
you.
weekend.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.